In the reflection, I saw Henry, or what looked like Henry. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his expression blank. He stood behind me, unmoving, just staring. My breath caught, and I whipped around, but no one was there. The restroom was empty. I turned back to the mirror, heart pounding. Henry was still there, but his face was different now, distorted, almost grotesque, as if something unnatural was trying to mimic him. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and then he raised a trembling hand to point directly at me. My legs felt frozen, my body rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, the reflection was gone. I stumbled out of the restroom, my heart racing. The lively sounds of the reunion were still carrying on outside, oblivious to the chaos I was experiencing. I ran back to Gary, who was standing near a small group of classmates, whispering urgently, "Are you sure it was Henry's body?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Gary nodded, his face grim. "I just got off the phone with the police. They said it was him. There's no mistake." "But that's impossible," I exclaimed. I picked him up. He was in my car. He came here with me. The group exchanged uneasy glances, and a heavy silence fell over us. Then, one of the women, Lisa, spoke up. "Do you remember the stories we used to tell about this area? About the woods?" I frowned, trying to recall. It had been so long since high school, and those tales had always seemed like childish nonsense. "You mean the stories about the shadow people?" I asked. Lisa nodded, her expression grave. "They weren't just stories. My grandmother used to warn me never to stop in these woods at night. She said there were things here that could mimic people, take their form." "That's ridiculous," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "I saw Henry. I talked to him. But was it really him?" Lisa asked softly. Her words hung in the air, sending a chill down my spine. Suddenly, the lights at the venue flickered, just as they had in the restroom. The music stopped, and a hush fell over the crowd. People looked around, confused, murmuring nervously. Then the low, guttural growl I'd heard earlier on the road echoed through the building, louder this time. The sound seemed to come from all directions, vibrating through the walls and floor. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized it wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something unnatural. The crowd began to panic, some people shouting, others rushing toward the exits. Gary grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." "Now, what about Henry?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what I meant by that. The man I'd picked up, the thing I'd picked up, wasn't Henry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished with me. Gary didn't answer. He pulled me toward the exit, but as we reached the door, it slammed shut on its own, as if an invisible force was holding it closed. The growling grew louder, almost deafening now, and the air felt heavy, suffocating. The lights flickered again, and then everything went dark. In the pitch black, I could hear people screaming, the sound of chairs and tables being overturned as they scrambled to find a way out. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold, clammy hand grip my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see Gary, but there was no one there. Then, a voice low and guttural, yet eerily familiar, whispered in my ear, "You shouldn't have stopped." I stumbled backward, my hands groping for something, anything to hold on to. The growling turned into a cacophony of snarls and whispers, all blending together in a nightmarish symphony. I could feel something closing in, the air thick with its presence. Out of the darkness, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, yellow, inhuman. They stared at me, unblinking, as the voice spoke again. "You brought me here. Now you will stay." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The glowing eyes grew closer, and I felt a sharp, icy pain in my chest, as if something was reaching inside me, pulling at my very essence. My vision blurred, and the world around me began to fade. When I woke up, I was lying on the side of the road, near my rental car. The sun was rising, casting a warm golden light over the forest. My body ached, and my mind was a foggy mess. I sat up, looking around. The reunion venue was nowhere in sight, and there was no sign of Gary, Lisa, or anyone else. It was as if the entire night had been a dream or a nightmare. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My car's dashboard was cracked, and the passenger seat was covered in dirt and leaves, as if someone or something had been sitting there. I stood, my legs trembling, and walked to the edge of the road. In the distance, I saw Henry's car, still sitting with its trunk open and hazards flashing. I didn't dare go closer. As I climbed into my car and started the engine, a strange sensation washed over me. I felt as if I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone. The forest seemed alive, the trees whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I drove away as fast as I could, vowing never to return. But even now, years later, I can still hear that growl in my dreams. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of Henry, his hollow eyes staring back at me, a silent reminder of the night I should never have stopped. I froze, staring at the reflection. Behind me, above one of the stalls, a face appeared. It was Henry's face, pale and lifeless, hovering above the stall door. The stall was nearly 8 feet high, but his head floated there, suspended in the air. His eyes met mine through the mirror, and a chilling smile spread across his face before he faded into nothingness. My knees buckled, and I stumbled out of the restroom, gasping for breath. My mind raced with questions. Was I losing my grip on reality? Had I really seen Henry's ghost? The reunion ended early. The news of Henry's death spread quickly, and no one could make sense of what had happened. I barely slept that night, haunted by the image of his ghostly smile. Every time I closed my eyes, the vision of him hovering, his lifeless face grinning at me, replayed in my mind like a broken record. A week later, Gary called me. They found Henry's killer, he said. Relief flooded through me. Thank God. Who was it? A man named Werner. He's a known drug dealer and thief. The police think he lured Henry into the forest and attacked him. My heart sank. So he's in custody now? Gary hesitated. No, he's dead. What? The morning after Henry's murder, they found Werner's body in a ditch near the forest. It's gruesome. Looks like something attacked him. A shiver ran down my spine. Do you think Henry? I couldn't finish the thought. Gary didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. The eerie possibility that Henry's spirit had taken revenge lingered in my mind, refusing to fade. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At night, shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision. Strange noises echoed outside my window, and I'd wake up drenched in sweat, haunted by dreams of Henry's smiling face. The dreams felt so real, as though he was trying to reach me, to tell me something I couldn't understand. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, the lights flickered. The air grew cold, and the faint smell of damp earth filled the room. My heart pounded as I turned toward the window. There, in the reflection, I saw him again. Henry, standing behind me, his eyes full of sorrow. "Why didn't you stop?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I spun around, but the room was empty. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. What did he mean? Stop for what? Had there been something I could have done to save him? Desperate for answers, I returned to the forest where Henry had died. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with an unnatural silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I found the spot where his car had been abandoned, the tire tracks still faintly visible in the dirt. As I stood there, a chill ran through me. The forest seemed to come alive with whispers, faint and indistinct, as if the trees themselves were speaking. And then I saw it, a faint, glowing figure moving through the trees. "Henry, why are you here?" I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, but his gaze held mine, filled with a mix of sadness and anger. Slowly, he raised a hand, pointing deeper into the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed. The path was treacherous, and every step felt heavier than the last. Finally, I reached a clearing. In the center was a small, makeshift grave marked with a crude wooden cross. My breath caught as I realized this was where Werner had been found. The air grew colder, and Henry's figure faded into the shadows. I thought it was over, that I could put the haunting behind me. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. The whispers in the forest followed me home, growing louder at night. I started to hear them clearly, a chorus of voices asking the same question over and over. Why didn't you stop? I delved into the past, searching for any clue that could explain what Henry's ghost wanted from me. I pored over old photos, messages, and even went back to our high school yearbook. Henry and I had been close once, inseparable even, but time had pulled us apart. Our last interaction before the reunion had been a text exchange 3 years ago, one I now regretted ignoring. It read, "Henry, hey, need to talk. It's urgent. Me? Can't right now. What's up? Henry? It's... Never mind. Forget it." I had never followed up. What had he needed to tell me? What if it could have prevented all this? The guilt ate away at me. I started seeing Henry more frequently, not just in mirrors or dreams, but in the waking world. He'd appear in crowds, watching from a distance, or in fleeting glimpses out of the corner of my eye. Each time, his expression grew darker, more desperate. He was trying to communicate something, but I couldn't understand. One night, I decided to confront him directly. I set up a camera in my room, lit a single candle, and sat cross-legged on the floor. "Henry," I said aloud, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "If you're here, if you need something from me, show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the candle flickered violently, and the room grew colder than ever before. My breath came out in visible puffs. The camera's screen flickered, and static filled the room. Slowly, he appeared, sitting across from me. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, but there was a flicker of humanity left in them. "Why didn't you stop?" he asked again, his voice echoing unnaturally. Tears streamed down my face. "Stop what?" "Henry, please, I don't understand." He reached out, his translucent hand hovering just above mine. Images flooded my mind, a montage of moments from our past. Laughter in the school cafeteria, late-night drives, secrets shared in hushed whispers. And then, darker memories. Henry arguing with someone I didn't recognize. A small metallic object glinting in the moonlight. Blood. The forest. "Werner, you knew?" Henry whispered. "You knew I was in trouble, and you didn't stop." The realization hit me like a freight train. The signs had been there. Henry had been spiraling, and I had chosen to ignore it, too caught up in my own life to notice. He had reached out for help, and I had failed him. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." Henry's expression softened, but the sadness remained. "It's not just me," he said, his voice fading. "There are others." Before I could ask what he meant, he disappeared, leaving me alone in the freezing room. The candle's flame steadied, and the temperature began to rise, but the weight on my chest didn't lift. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about Henry's final months. I uncovered a trail of unpaid debts, confrontations with dangerous people, and cryptic messages he'd left for friends and family. It became clear that Werner hadn't been the only one involved. Henry had stumbled into something much larger, something far more sinister. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, leading me back to the forest again and again. Each time, I ventured deeper, uncovering hidden remnants of whatever dealings had transpired there. Broken bottles, discarded needles, and once a blood-stained piece of fabric half buried in the dirt. The forest was a graveyard of secrets, and I was only scratching the surface. Eventually, I discovered a hidden notebook in Henry's belongings, tucked away in a false bottom of his old gym bag. Its pages were filled with frantic scrawls, names, dates, and chilling warnings. One name stood out among the rest: Martin Adler, a local businessman with a spotless reputation. But according to Henry's notes, Adler was anything but innocent. He had been orchestrating illegal activities, using people like Werner to do his dirty work. Henry had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, and it had cost him his life. I brought the evidence to the authorities, but their interest was lukewarm at best. Adler's influence ran deep, and without concrete proof, there was little they could do. Frustrated but determined, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Henry's spirit was restless, it was because his story hadn't been told. I began writing, documenting everything: the visions, the findings, the connections, and sent it to every journalist and outlet I could think of. The article gained traction. Whispers of Adler's corruption spread like wildfire. The authorities could no longer ignore the mounting pressure. Investigations were reopened, and soon enough, Adler's empire began to crumble. The truth about Henry's death finally saw the light of day. The last time I saw Henry was on a crisp autumn morning as I stood by his grave. The air was still, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden rays across the headstone. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing beneath the oak tree, his smile no longer chilling, but warm and full of gratitude. He nodded once before fading into the light. Some forces cannot be explained, and the past has a way of haunting us in ways we'll never fully understand. But one thing is certain: Henry's story wasn't just a ghost's lament. It was a call to action, a reminder that sometimes the living must finish what the dead cannot.